The human spirit is not a fragile thing. It is often portrayed as such in moments of crisis, delicate and easily shattered. Yet, history, science, and everyday life tell a different story entirely. Our capacity to endure, to adapt, and to ultimately triumph is one of the most profound mysteries of our existence. This is not about simply surviving, it is about the art of not breaking. It is about forging a resilience so profound, so unshakable, that it transforms the very nature of adversity. This journey begins not at the summit of victory, but in the deepest valley of despair. We will look into the lives of those who faced catastrophic loss, systemic opposition, or crippling personal challenges, and yet, they did not crumble. They bent, they stretched, but they found an inner core that held. What is this core? Is it innate, or is it a skill, a muscle that can be deliberately trained and strengthened? We are searching for the blueprint of the unyielding mind. We are investigating the chemical, neurological, and philosophical components that allow some people to emerge from the fires of suffering not diminished, but refined. The opening scene is a montage of quiet strength, a marathon runner's grimace in the final mile, a scientist calmly reviewing a failed experiment for the 100th time, a community rebuilding after a devastating natural disaster. These are not superhuman beings, they are ordinary people who have mastered an extraordinary skill. They have learned how to negotiate with fear, how to weaponize hope, and how to find meaning in the chaos. Their stories are a testament to the fact that you can control your response, even when you cannot control the event. We will deconstruct the myth of the overnight success and the myth of the natural-born hero. Resilience is earned. It is a slow, methodical process of self-discovery under pressure. It is the wisdom gleaned from 1,000 small failures, woven together to form an unbreakable emotional armor. Prepare to see vulnerability not as a weakness, but as the raw material from which true strength is forged. The art of not breaking is an invitation to redefine what you are capable of enduring. The concept of resilience is not new. It has been documented and discussed in every major civilization throughout history, often under different guises. Stoicism, an ancient Greek and Roman philosophy, is perhaps the clearest historical precursor to modern psychological resilience training. The Stoics did not teach emotional suppression, as is often misunderstood. They taught a rigorous mental discipline focused on differentiating what you can control from what you cannot. This fundamental distinction is the bedrock of enduring strength. The ability to accept the inevitable pain of life, loss, sickness, tragedy, was their primary mechanism for achieving inner peace and strength. We see this same thread woven through other cultural and historical narratives. The Japanese concept of kintsugi, the art of repairing broken pottery with lacquer dusted or mixed with powdered gold, beautifully embodies the transformation of breakage into a valuable history. The break is not hidden, it is illuminated. This metaphorical approach to life's scars suggests that damage is not a defect, but an essential, beautiful part of the object's story. It is a visual representation of post-traumatic growth. In times of war, such as the Blitz in London, the stories of ordinary citizens maintaining their daily routines amidst nightly bombings illustrate collective resilience. This was not merely stubbornness, but a form of social and psychological defense. The continuation of normalcy, even a facade of it, denied the enemy the psychological victory. From the writings of Marcus Aurelius to the narratives of civil rights leaders, the pattern remains consistent. The truly resilient individual does not seek to avoid suffering. They seek to prepare for it, to understand its inevitability, and to leverage it as a tool for deeper self-knowledge and purpose. The historical context proves that resilience is a universal human trait, refined by culture and time. It is not a modern invention but a deeply ingrained survival mechanism, one that is crucial to explore and reactivate in our own complex, stressful world. This is our foundation. Our investigation into unshakable resilience will be anchored by the stories of three distinct individuals, each representing a different theater of human adversity. First, we introduce Dr. Elias Thorne, a former pediatric oncologist. For 2 decades, he dedicated his life to treating children with terminal illnesses, a profession defined by relentless emotional attrition and inevitable, profound loss. Dr. Thorne's resilience is not a fiery strength, but a deep, compassionate weariness that never surrendered to burnout. His story illustrates the power of moral and empathetic resilience, how to continuously give of yourself without losing your own self in the process. He learned to compartmentalize grief while maximizing the quality of the time he had with his patients. His survival mechanism was rooted in finding meaning in the small, daily battles won, rather than the ultimate war against disease. Second, we meet Seraphina Reyes, a social justice advocate and former political prisoner. Her story is one of systemic resilience. After being unjustly detained for her activism, she endured years of isolation and psychological pressure. Sarah's journey is a masterclass in maintaining internal freedom and mental integrity when external control is absolute. She taught herself mental strategies to maintain a sense of purpose and connection, even when physically cut off from the world. Her ability to forgive, not for the sake of her captors but for the sake of her own mind, is a key element of her unshakable core. Finally, there is Kaito Tanaka, a successful engineer who lost everything in a single, catastrophic market crash: his business, his fortune, and his professional identity. Kaito represents adaptive and economic resilience. He did not become a victim of his circumstances. Instead, he systematically deconstructed his identity, shedding the parts that were tied to external success. He rebuilt his life from the ground up, not by returning to his old industry, but by pivoting entirely, driven by the belief that his character, not his assets, was his true wealth. His story shows the practical, step-by-step process of reinvention. These three people, Dr. Thorne, Sera Reyes, and Kaito Tanaka, are our guides. Their experiences are the living text of the art of not breaking. Their methods, their philosophies, and their eventual triumphs will form the basis of our analytical framework. The central mystery we must confront is this: why do two individuals facing the exact same trauma, a job loss, a devastating accident, a personal betrayal, walk two entirely different paths? One succumbs to depression, spirals into self-destructive behavior, and remains perpetually broken. The other eventually finds a way to integrate the experience, emerge stronger, and even achieve what psychologists call post-traumatic growth. This disparity is the initial problem of resilience. It is not simply a matter of character. If it were, the answer would be too simplistic. Instead, the difference lies in the narrative they construct around the event. The one who breaks often adopts a victim narrative: "This happened to me, I am defined by my loss, the world is fundamentally unsafe. The resilient individual, however, shifts the narrative to one of agency and meaning. This happened, but I choose how I respond to it. My character is forged by this challenge. I will use this pain to help others. The mystery is how this critical narrative shift is initiated. It is not an emotional process, it is a cognitive and almost instantaneous decision. We must investigate the moment of rupture, that psychological flashpoint when the mind's defenses are overwhelmed. What mental tools are deployed in that moment? Is it a pre-existing belief system? Is it a learned cognitive shortcut? The initial problem is a search for the switch, the mechanism that pivots the internal monologue from despair to determination. The initial stages of suffering are almost identical for everyone. The true divergence occurs shortly thereafter, when the mind begins to assign meaning and forge a path forward. Understanding this initial, critical divergence is the key to unlocking unshakable resilience. It is a psychological enigma we must solve. The first major clue to understanding unshakable resilience emerges from the laboratory of Dr. Elias Thorne. It is an event he calls his greatest failure. After months of intensive, experimental treatment, a young patient, a 9-year-old girl named Maya, passed away. Dr. Thorne had poured all his professional energy and a great deal of his personal hope into her case. The conventional response to such a professional failure, particularly in a high-stakes, high-empathy field, is to retreat, to harden one's emotions, or to leave the profession entirely due to unbearable burnout. Instead, Dr. Thorne adopted a counterintuitive practice. He began a small, ritualistic habit of writing a single, private note to the deceased patient's family, weeks after the funeral. The note was not about treatment details. It was a single, simple paragraph acknowledging a specific memory he shared with the child, a joke, a favorite drawing, a moment of profound courage. This simple act, the grief ritual, became his first major clue to self-preservation. It served a dual purpose. First, it allowed him to consciously process the empathy and sorrow he felt, preventing it from being walled off and becoming toxic bitterness. Second, and more importantly, it shifted his focus from the unchangeable outcome, Maya's death, to the meaningful process, the care he provided, the courage he witnessed. This ritual of conscious, intentional grief transformed his professional narrative. It was the moment he realized the true victory was not in curing every patient, an impossible task, but in honoring the human connection in every single case. The event reveals a critical insight: unshakable resilience is often maintained not by a grand gesture, but by small, consistent, self-regulating behaviors that redirect emotional energy from regret to reverence. The clue is in the ritual. To truly grasp the art of not breaking, we must dive deep into its biological and neurological origins. Resilience is not purely a psychological construct, it is hardwired into our ancient survival mechanisms. At its core, resilience is the brain's capacity for allostasis, achieving stability through physiological and behavioral change. When a trauma occurs, the brain initiates a cascade of stress hormones, primarily cortisol and adrenaline, designed to manage an immediate threat, the fight or flight response. In a resilient individual, the prefrontal cortex, the area of the brain responsible for planning, decision-making, and emotional regulation, quickly re-engages. This is the brain's executive control center stepping in to moderate the emotional panic of the amygdala. Our research indicates that chronic stress, however, can chemically dampen the communication between the prefrontal cortex and the amygdala. This leads to a state of learned helplessness, where the emotional brain runs unchecked. The resilient brain, conversely, appears to maintain or even strengthen these neural pathways under duress. This structural difference is not necessarily a birthright. It is influenced by genetic predisposition, certainly, but far more significantly by accumulated experience and deliberate mental training. Practices like mindfulness and cognitive restructuring, for example, physically increase the gray matter density in the prefrontal cortex. This is the deep origin of unshakable resilience, the deliberate, neurological training of the brain's executive function to override the ancient panic signal. It's about building a better communication highway between the emotional center and the logic center. When Kaito Tanaka faced financial ruin, his ability to step back and create a rational, systematic plan was not a philosophical victory, it was a triumph of his prefrontal cortex successfully regulating the stress signals of his amygdala. This deep dive shows us that the art of not breaking is, fundamentally, an exercise in applied neurobiology. In the archives of the human rights organization that helped Seraphina Reyes, a crucial, forgotten document was discovered, a small, hand-stitched notebook containing her writings from her time in solitary confinement. This document is a profound artifact, a real-time manual for manufacturing resilience under the most extreme pressure. The contents of the notebook reveal a systematic approach to what she termed internal architecture. Sarah did not have access to books, light, or communication, yet her writing shows an incredible clarity of mind. The pages are filled not with lamentations, but with daily assignments. Task 1, Sensory Recall. Spend 30 minutes mentally rebuilding her childhood home, room by room, focusing on texture, temperature, and specific smells. This was a deliberate effort to anchor her mind in reality and prevent sensory deprivation from fracturing her memory. Task 2, Narrative Control. Write a dialogue in her mind with a respected historical figure. Marcus Aurelius was a favorite. The purpose was to practice intellectual conversation, forcing her mind to engage in complex thought and argument, defying the intellectual stagnation of isolation. Task 3, Future Forging. Detail a plan for the first 6 months after her release, down to the brand of coffee she would buy and the first person she would call. This cemented a psychological bridge to the future, making her current suffering a temporary, necessary passage, rather than an endless state. This notebook is our crucial witness. It proves that unshakable resilience is a deliberate, active, and highly structured process of mental self-governance. It is not a passive waiting game. It is a daily, disciplined act of creation. Sarah Reyes's internal architecture was her shield, built from memory, logic, and hope. The very existence of this document, preserved against all odds, is a testament to the power of a single mind determined not to be broken. The notebook is the foundational text of the art of not breaking. For our subjects, the stakes were never static, they escalated, often unexpectedly, testing their carefully constructed resilience at its breaking point. Dr. Elias Thorne faced a professional complication when his hospital implemented a new, hyper-efficient, but emotionally sterile protocol that drastically reduced the time he could spend with families. This institutional barrier threatened to dismantle the very core of his grief ritual and his source of professional meaning. The system was now forcing him to retreat into the emotional shell he had fought for years to shed. His challenge became less about handling death and more about fighting for the humanity in the process of dying. Seraphina Reyes's most severe test was not the initial isolation, but a sudden, brief moment of hope. After a year of confinement, she was told she would be released, only for the decision to be brutally and inexplicably reversed 2 days later. The shock of having freedom snatched away proved a greater psychological shock than the endless certainty of imprisonment. This moment required her to employ a higher order of resilience, one based not on enduring the known, but on surviving the betrayal of hope itself. Kaito Tanaka's complication came after his successful pivot into a new career. Just as he was stabilizing, a former business partner publicly blamed him for the entire financial collapse, threatening to ruin his reputation in his new field. This was an attack on his integrity, the non-financial asset he had worked hardest to rebuild. He was forced to choose between a costly, reputation-damaging legal fight and allowing an unjust narrative to define him. The stakes moved from purely economic survival to the defense of his moral and personal identity. These escalations reveal a profound truth: unshakable resilience is not a one-time achievement. It is a constantly evolving system that must adapt to novel forms of attack. When the external environment changes the rules of the game, the truly resilient spirit must invent new, higher-level strategies to defend its inner core. The core evidence for the art of not breaking can be categorized into 3 psychological pillars, drawn directly from the initial responses of our protagonists to their respective traumas. Pillar 1, the locus of control. This refers to the extent to which a person believes they have control over the events that affect them. Kaito Tanaka's response to financial ruin is textbook. He immediately and aggressively shifted his focus to an internal locus of control. He could not control the market, the global economy, or his past losses. He could control his next action, his daily schedule, and his intellectual pursuits. This cognitive move is a crucial firewall. It funnels energy away from futile worry and into productive action, making his effort feel meaningful, regardless of the outcome. Pillar 2, cognitive reframing. This is the ability to look at a devastating event and actively seek an alternative, often non-obvious, positive or instructive interpretation. Dr. Thorne's grief ritual is a perfect example. By focusing on the meaningful time with Maya rather than the unavoidable death, he reframed his experience from a professional failure to a moral triumph of presence. He changed the filter through which he viewed his entire profession. This is not delusion, it is the purposeful manufacturing of a purpose-driven narrative to supersede a purely tragic one. Pillar 3, the use of ritual and routine. Seraphina Reyes's meticulous scheduling of her internal architecture tasks highlights the power of routine in chaos. When the external world is random, cruel, and unpredictable, the mind craves order. Daily rituals, whether a 5-minute meditation, a precise cleaning of a small space, or a focused hour of mental work, create islands of stability. This gives the psyche a sense of competence and agency, proving to the mind that it is still in control of some territory, however small. These 3 pillars, control, reframing, and ritual, form the analytical framework for the initial stage of building unshakable resilience. The environment, both geographical and social, plays a critical, often underappreciated role in both the erosion and the fostering of resilience. Our deep dive takes us to the concept of the blue zone for the mind, a place or community structure that actively encourages post-traumatic growth. In Dr. Thorne's case, the harsh environment was the pediatric ward itself, a place of constant, low-grade trauma. His resilience was fostered by his support network of nurses and fellow doctors who created a subtle, unspoken social ritual of decompression, often over a single late-night cup of coffee. This informal, trusted space allowed for the sharing of vulnerability without judgment, making his emotional labor manageable. Conversely, Kaito Tanaka's initial environment of corporate finance was a desert for true resilience. It was an environment that prized the appearance of strength and actively punished perceived weakness or failure. His true resilience only began when he physically removed himself from that hyper-competitive, toxic environment and entered a small, collaborative startup incubator. The geographical change was less important than the psychological environment it represented, one that valued learning from failure over denying it. Seraphina Reyes's environment was the most extreme, a confined, sensory-deprived cell. This forced her to create a purely internal geographical sanctuary. Her brain became her world. She would mentally walk through the streets of her favorite city, meticulously naming shops and recalling conversations. This mental journey, this self-imposed cognitive geography, became her escape pod. The analysis reveals that if the physical or social environment is actively hostile, the resilient individual must either physically relocate or master the skill of creating a robust, insulating internal environment. The unshakable spirit knows how to build its own shelter, even in a storm. The antagonists in the art of not breaking are rarely people, they are systemic forces, psychological biases, and cultural narratives that actively promote fragility. The primary antagonist is the tyranny of the narrative self. This is the internal voice that demands a perfect, linear life story. When trauma introduces a radical, messy, and painful chapter, this tyrannical voice panics, insisting the story is ruined, or that the person is fundamentally flawed. This voice is the psychological engine of self-pity and shame. It thrives on the what-if scenarios and the belief that the past should have been different. Seraphina Reyes fought this voice daily, using her future-forging ritual to write a new, defiant narrative that made the prison chapter a necessary prelude to her greater work. A secondary antagonist is institutional inertia. This is the bureaucracy, the rigid system, or the cultural expectation that actively works against adaptive change and human-centric processing. Dr. Thorne's battle against the new hospital protocol is a clear example. Institutional inertia demands conformity and efficiency, often sacrificing the emotional bandwidth required for human resilience. It is a subtle, corrosive force that makes it difficult for individuals to practice self-care or prioritize mental health within a demanding system. The third force is the social contagion of fragility. In a world obsessed with comfort and immediate gratification, any sustained discomfort or failure is often sensationalized and pathologized. This social environment can subtly reinforce the victim identity, making it easier and more socially validated to remain broken than to do the hard, quiet work of rebuilding. Kaito Tanaka faced this when his former colleagues treated him with a mixture of pity and avoidance, an act that threatened to cement his identity as a failure. The resilient individual must learn to ignore the social gravity that pulls them towards the path of least resistance, the path of perpetual self-pity. The journey to unshakable resilience is rarely solitary, and it is here that we examine the powerful role of human connection, both its ability to forge unforeseen alliances and to inflict devastating betrayals. For Kaito Tanaka, the betrayal was the public accusation by his former business partner, a man he had trusted implicitly. This personal attack, coming after his financial loss, was nearly crippling. It was a failure of his judgment, striking at a deeper level than the market crash. The financial loss was external, the betrayal was internal. It forced him to redefine trust and to recognize that true resilience requires not just self-reliance, but a rigorous, unsentimental assessment of who is allowed into your inner circle. He learned that building an unshakable self means building a strong boundary against toxic or unreliable people. The unforeseen alliance came to Seraphina Reyes through a seemingly insignificant event, a fellow prisoner, housed 3 cells away, who used a series of taps on the wall to communicate in Morse code. This subtle, almost imperceptible connection was a lifeline. It was an intellectual, empathetic, and human alliance in an environment designed for absolute dehumanization. The sheer effort required to maintain this secret connection forced her mind to remain sharp, focused, and hopeful. It proved that resilience is not a purely individualistic endeavor. A single, small, meaningful connection can provide the external proof that one's life still matters, which is the emotional fuel to keep fighting. The analysis shows that resilience is a social phenomenon. The betrayal forces a clarification of personal values and boundaries, acting as a painful, necessary filter. The alliance provides the essential validation and connection that transforms suffering from senseless isolation into a shared, bearable human experience. Both the alliance and the betrayal are critical, though opposite, forces in the forging of the unshakable self. Every journey toward unshakable resilience has a critical inflection point, a moment that solidifies the commitment to rebuild and transforms the individual from a survivor into a deliberate architect of their future. This is the point of no return. For Dr. Elias Thorne, the point of no return was the moment he decided to actively defy the hospital's new, impersonal protocol. He realized that to save his own mental health and maintain his professional integrity, he had to risk professional censure. He deliberately extended his time with a family who had just lost a child, not for treatment, but simply to listen. He violated the rules to uphold his moral code. This was a non-negotiable choice, his humanity over the bureaucracy. By making this choice public, he burned the bridge back to emotional numbness. He made his commitment to compassionate resilience an indelible part of his professional identity. For Seraphina Reyes, the point of no return was the reversal of her promised release. In that moment, she had a clear choice: descend into the justified rage and despair, which would have meant the end of her internal life, or harness the fury and convert it into a new, higher level of intellectual warfare. She chose the latter. She systematically reviewed her entire, internal architecture, seeking flaws, strengthening weak points, and adding new, more complex mental tasks. She used the pain of betrayal as a catalyst, making her commitment to her inner freedom absolute. The point of no return is characterized by a conscious, existential choice. It is the moment when the individual realizes that retreating to their old, fragile self is no longer an option, regardless of the cost. It is the definitive declaration: I will not be defined by what was done to me, I will be defined by what I do next. The halfway point of our investigation unveils a surprising and counterintuitive truth that twists the conventional understanding of resilience. Unshakable strength is not found in an increase of willpower, but in the radical acceptance of one's own limitations and vulnerability. The major revelation is the shift from willpower to self-compassion. Willpower is a finite resource. It is the grit, the determination, and the force of will that gets a person through the initial shock. But over the long term, relying on willpower alone leads to exhaustion and inevitable collapse. Seraphina Reyes's early methods were high in willpower. But after the betrayal of her release, she added a new, critical step to her ritual: a deliberate 5 minutes of silent, non-judgmental acknowledgement of her own fear, pain, and inadequacy. This act of self-compassion was the turning point. It lowered the internal pressure, allowing her brain's executive functions to recover and re-engage. It is a psychological, save point. When you are kind to yourself in a moment of pain, you stop the internal battle, freeing up energy to fight the external one. The twist is that the most resilient people are also the most self-forgiving. Kaito Tanaka didn't rebuild his life by relentlessly driving himself. He rebuilt it by first allowing himself to mourn the loss of his old identity, treating his former self with the same kindness he would a close friend who had failed. This is the moment we realize the art of not breaking is not about hardness, it's about flexibility and nurturing. The unshakable core is not made of stone, but of a highly durable, self-repairing, organic material, the capacity for radical self-acceptance. A second set of critical clues emerges from the physiological data. We move beyond the psychological and look at the physical markers of resilience. The new evidence centers on the vagus nerve and its influence on the body's rest and digest system, or the parasympathetic nervous system. Resilience is not measured by how quickly you can fire up your stress response, but by how quickly you can shut it down. This is measured by heart rate variability, HRV, the millisecond variation between heartbeats. A high HRV indicates a highly flexible nervous system, one that can rapidly switch from high alert, sympathetic, back to calm, parasympathetic. Our case studies show that all three subjects intuitively or deliberately practiced activities that boosted their HRV. Dr. Thorne's deliberate, slow-paced conversation with families acted as a form of controlled, conscious breathing, a known HRV booster. Kaito Tanaka took up competitive chess, a game that demands high focus but low physical threat, teaching his nervous system to regulate high cognitive stress without a full-blown adrenal response. Seraphina Reyes's intense focus on mental mapping and recall also served as a deep form of mental deceleration. The second clue is that unshakable resilience is a skill of recovery, not of endless stamina. You don't win by being unbreakable, you win by being unbreakable, able to stop the breaking process and initiate repair with speed and efficiency. The evidence is clear: the most profound psychological strength has a measurable, physiological signature in the rapid, flexible regulation of the autonomic nervous system. The art of not breaking is, in part, the art of optimizing the internal machinery of calm. The psychological and social impact of unshakable resilience extends far beyond the individual, creating a ripple effect of strength within their communities. The first major impact is the destigmatization of struggle. By being transparent about his process of emotional attrition and recovery, Dr. Thorne inadvertently created a model of sustainable compassion for his entire department. His colleagues began to see that admitting their professional pain was not a sign of weakness, but a requirement for longevity. His individual resilience became a template for institutional health, challenging the toxic culture of medical stoicism. His personal choice became a social solution. The second impact is the power of narrative as a catalyst for action. Seraphina Reyes, upon her eventual release, did not just return to her life, she transformed her prison experience into the central, galvanizing force of her advocacy. Her story, detailed in her small notebook, gave immediate, visceral context to her message. She turned her pain into her most powerful political asset. The social impact was the transformation of a personal trauma into a universal call for justice, proving that the deepest suffering, when processed correctly, can have the highest social value. For Kaito Tanaka, his public, systematic rebuilding process became an unsung anthem for entrepreneurial failure. His willingness to discuss the cognitive steps he took to reinvent himself provided a practical, shame-free roadmap for others who had suffered professional catastrophe. He offered a social script for how to fail well. The core finding is that true resilience is never selfish. It organically creates a blueprint for others, transforming the resilient individual from a mere survivor into a powerful, empathetic guide for collective endurance. Building on our initial analysis, the second set of core evidence details the practical, actionable strategies that sustain unshakable resilience over time, moving from initial crisis management to long-term maintenance. Strategy 4. Selective engagement. The filter. This is the skill of choosing which battles to fight and which to cede. Kaito Tanaka, when faced with the public defamation by his former partner, performed a rigorous cost-benefit analysis that was purely cognitive. He realized a legal battle would consume his energy, time, and focus, his most precious, non-renewable resources. He chose to let the lie stand, focusing instead on the verifiable integrity of his present work. Resilience here means knowing that silence is sometimes a profound act of self-defense, not surrender. It is about protecting your focus above all else. Strategy 5. The mini-future projection. Seraphina Reyes's future forging was refined into a constant, small-scale mental projection. Instead of only imagining her life in 5 years, she trained herself to project a positive outcome for the next 48 hours, or the next week. This manageable horizon prevents the overwhelming feeling of a vast, unchangeable future. By consistently succeeding in the mini-future, e.g., sticking to her mental assignments for the day, she built a compounding proof of her own agency. Strategy 6. The detached observer. This is the metacognitive skill of stepping outside your immediate pain to observe your emotional state as if it were happening to a third party. When Dr. Thorne felt the crushing weight of a failure, he would silently narrate his feelings. Elias is experiencing profound professional grief and a sense of inadequacy. This momentary detachment creates a psychological distance. It separates the self from the emotion, making the feeling a data point to be managed, not an identity to be consumed by. These 3 strategies define the sustainable, long-term practice of the art of not breaking. In our subjects' lives, the largest attempts to cover up the truth were internal, the suppression of painful vulnerability in favor of a performance of strength. This psychological cover-up is the enemy of genuine resilience. The most insidious suppression was Dr. Thorne's early, unconscious attempt to hide his emotional fragility from his wife. He was so conditioned to be the pillar of strength for his patients' families that he felt his own pain was an act of disloyalty to his professional image. This internal cover-up led to sleepless nights, irritability, and an emotional distancing that almost broke his marriage. His truth was that he needed help, but his internalized narrative of the heroic doctor forbade him from admitting it. Similarly, Kaito Tanaka initially tried to suppress the emotional reality of his financial loss. He adopted the persona of the shrug-it-off entrepreneur, publicly joking about his misfortune. This performance was an exhausting cover-up of a deeper truth, a profound sense of shame and worthlessness tied to his professional identity. This suppression acted as a psychological dam, blocking the grief and preventing him from truly processing the loss, which is a necessary precursor to rebuilding. The unshakable spirit must fight against the temptation to cover up its own weakness. True resilience requires the radical transparency of acknowledging, I am deeply hurt, and I am struggling. The suppression of this truth is a form of self-betrayal, and every cover-up only reinforces the toxic belief that one's authentic, struggling self is unacceptable. The art of not breaking demands an uncompromising honesty about the current state of one's inner world. As our investigation deepens, the pursuit of resilience takes us into the esoteric, often overlooked area of existential meaning. It's not enough to manage stress, you must have a compelling reason why you are managing it. The question shifts from how do I survive this? To what is this suffering for? We pursue the idea that unshakable resilience is ultimately a function of a well-defined personal purpose. Dr. Thorne's new mission was to lobby for more compassionate care protocols, using his own experience as evidence. He didn't just survive his burnout, he weaponized the experience to change the system for the better. His suffering was thus retroactively given a noble, external purpose. Seraphina Reyes's suffering was transformed into the moral foundation of her human rights work. The darkest chapter of her life became the source of her moral authority and her deepest empathy. The prison was merely the training ground for her life's defining work. Her investigation into her own mind became a pursuit of justice for others. Kaito Tanaka's pursuit led him away from financial purpose entirely and into the field of sustainable engineering, a cause he found genuinely more meaningful than profit. The loss of his first company gave him the freedom to pursue work that aligned with his deepest values. The investigation concludes that you cannot build unshakable resilience without a strong, external purpose that is larger than the self. The pursuit is not of happiness, but of meaningful contribution, which acts as a psychological buffer against all forms of personal failure. To illustrate the stark difference between reactive coping and proactive resilience, we introduce a parallel storyline, the life of Dr. Lina Sharma, a contemporary and colleague of Dr. Thorne. Dr. Sharma faced similar professional pressures but chose a different path. She adopted the traditional, tough it out approach, internalizing the pain, suppressing her grief, and refusing to participate in the doctor's informal decompression rituals. She saw vulnerability as unprofessional. Her immediate performance was impeccable, she worked longer hours and maintained an outward veneer of control. But the internal pressure was unsustainable. The flashback shows a slow, subtle decline, increased reliance on sleep aids, emotional outbursts at home, and a growing cynicism towards her patients. She was, in essence, performing resilience, not embodying it. The narrative runs parallel to Dr. Thorne's journey. While Thorne was engaging in his difficult, honest grief ritual and fighting the bureaucratic system, Sharma was doubling down on isolation. The tragic conclusion of the parallel storyline is Dr. Sharma's eventual, total burnout and her abrupt, disillusioned exit from the profession. She did not break dramatically, she simply eroded away, piece by piece, until nothing was left. This parallel story serves as a crucial warning. It shows that merely surviving is not resilience. True resilience is the process that allows a person to sustain their purpose and humanity over time. The breakdown of Dr. Sharma proves that the suppression of pain only creates a temporary illusion of strength, ultimately leading to a more complete and devastating self-annihilation. The ultimate test of unshakable resilience comes in a direct confrontation with the source of the trauma, whether it is physical, as in Seraphina Reyes's final interrogation, or intellectual, as in Kaito Tanaka's defense of his integrity. Seraphina's confrontation was intellectual and emotional. In her final interrogation before being released, the interrogator attempted to dismantle her internal architecture, ridiculing her activism, and questioning her moral right to pursue her cause. Her response was a performance of pure, non-violent inner freedom. She did not argue, she simply stated her foundational beliefs with calm, unwavering certainty. She had already won the battle in her own mind years ago, during her narrative control exercises. She had defined her truth, and nothing the interrogator could say could redefine it for her. This was the triumph of inner authority over external power. Kaito Tanaka's confrontation was the systematic, public presentation of the evidence that exonerated him and implicitly implicated his former partner. He didn't engage in an emotional battle. He presented an undeniable, fact-based narrative of his financial and ethical conduct. He refused to fight on the emotional terrain of anger and vengeance, choosing instead the unshakable ground of objective truth. His confrontation was not an attack on the other person, but a final, public declaration of his own ethical self-worth. The confrontation phase is where the practice becomes proof. It is the moment the external world tests the inner architecture. The resilient individual does not seek to destroy the opponent. They seek to demonstrate the profound, unshakable stability of their own core. The art of not breaking often necessitates a profound, voluntary sacrifice or a devastating, integrated loss that recalibrates the entire life system. For Dr. Elias Thorne, the sacrifice was a profound one. He voluntarily stepped away from his role as a lead physician. To maintain his ethical core and his mental health, he realized he could no longer function within the constraints of the new, inhumane hospital protocol. He sacrificed the prestige, the salary, and the lifelong professional identity of being a chief oncologist to pursue a lesser-paid, but emotionally sustainable, consulting role focused on end-of-life care and institutional empathy. This sacrifice was the final, necessary cost of his unshakable resilience. He chose to save his soul over saving his status. Kaito Tanaka's major loss was the final, definitive cutting of ties with his old social circle. He realized the people who had defined him by his wealth and professional success could not be part of his new, values-driven life. He sacrificed a decade of professional relationships, which was a devastating social loss, but a necessary act of psychological self-purification. He traded a large, superficial network for a small, authentic one. This phase proves that resilience is not about hoarding. It is about a clear-eyed willingness to give up what is no longer serving your highest self. The sacrifice is the final, painful step of recognizing that some things, a job, a relationship, an old identity, must be allowed to break and fall away so that the stronger, more authentic self can finally stand alone. In the final stages of the journey, the disparate pieces of the art of not breaking coalesce into a single, comprehensive philosophy of life. The final pieces fall into place around the concept of anti-fragility. Nassim Nicholas Taleb popularized this idea: things that are merely resilient resist shock and stay the same, things that are anti-fragile actually improve and get stronger when exposed to shock. This is the difference between simply bouncing back and actively evolving forward. Dr. Thorne's experience of fighting the bureaucracy did not just make him a survivor, it made him a highly effective advocate who understood the levers of institutional change. He had become anti-fragile in the political arena. He used his pain to become a better, more powerful force for good. Seraphina Reyes's isolation forced her mind into such rigorous, disciplined focus that upon her release, she was intellectually sharper, a more compelling writer, and a more focused strategist than ever before. The prison had, paradoxically, become the world's most intense personal development program. She became anti-fragile in her intellectual and moral fortitude. Kaito Tanaka's total loss of identity freed him from the crippling fear of failure. He learned that the worst-case scenario was survivable and even generative. He approached his new career with a recklessness and creative abandon that his previous, fear-driven self could never have possessed. He became anti-fragile in his entrepreneurial approach. The final piece is the realization that the greatest shock of your life is not an event to be recovered from, but a brutal, high-stakes gift that forces an evolutionary leap. The primary conclusion of our investigation is the definitive truth about unshakable resilience: it is the practiced, conscious, and systematic transformation of pain into purpose. Resilience is not a passive capacity for absorption. It is an active, creative energy. It is the human brain's highest function, the ability to find, create, or assign meaning to a random, painful event. This process elevates the experience from mere suffering to a crucible for transformation. The unshakable core is built not by avoiding the emotional weight of a crisis, but by running toward it with a specific set of tools: the internal locus of control, Kaito, the self-compassion ritual, Sarah, and the moral purpose, Thorne. These tools work together to manage the shock while optimizing the recovery. The final truth is that there is no unbreakable person. There are only people who have mastered the art of acknowledging their fragility, quickly initiating the repair process, and intentionally integrating the scar tissue of their trauma to make them functionally stronger than they were before. They do not fear the break because they know exactly how to use the pieces. The art of not breaking is, therefore, the art of post-traumatic growth as a deliberate life philosophy. It is a choice to use the worst thing that has ever happened to you as the foundation for the best person you have yet to become. This is the ultimate lesson gleaned from the lives of those who refuse to be shattered. The immediate consequences of achieving unshakable resilience are rarely comfortable. They involve a necessary shedding of old skins and a reordering of relationships. Dr. Thorne's immediate aftermath involved a difficult, public break from his former career path. He faced the judgment and pity of colleagues who could not understand why he would abandon a prestigious position. The consequence was a loss of social status, but the gain was an enormous sense of intellectual and moral clarity. His emotional health was immediately stabilized, and the quality of his work, now focused on policy, skyrocketed. Seraphina Reyes's immediate consequence of her confrontation was her rapid, overwhelming ascent into the public eye. She was not just released, she became a symbol. This brought new pressures, the pressure to always be strong, to always be the perfect symbol. The consequence was a new, higher-level test of her resilience, maintaining her authenticity in the face of public adoration and scrutiny. She had to use her internal architecture to navigate fame, a form of external pressure as potent as isolation. Kaito Tanaka's consequence was the creation of a much smaller, but fiercely loyal, community around his new venture. He stopped chasing validation from the masses and began building with a small team who shared his newly defined, non-negotiable values. The immediate consequence was a slow, deliberate rebuilding of financial security, but on a foundation of ethical stability. The aftermath proves that the immediate result of resilience is often a simpler, more purpose-driven, but initially less comfortable life. The long-term legacy of the unshakable spirit is the permanent alteration of the environment they once struggled in, creating a path for others to follow. Dr. Thorne's legacy is the compassionate care policy, adopted by his former hospital and later, by medical institutions across the region. His sacrifice led to a systemic change that recognized and mandated the psychological well-being of both the caregiver and the patient's family. He did not just heal himself, he helped heal a broken system, proving that institutional change is possible when driven by a single, morally resilient individual. Seraphina Reyes's long-term impact is her organization, built on the principles of her prison notebook. It focuses not just on legal defense, but on mental fortification for activists in high-risk zones. Her legacy is a living, breathing model of how to maintain integrity and purpose in the face of tyranny, passing on the skills of internal architecture to a new generation of leaders. Kaito Tanaka's legacy is a new, profitable, and highly ethical business model in his industry, one that fundamentally rejects the greed and fragility of his former life. His success proves a foundational economic truth: sustainable ethics are a form of business anti-fragility. His company is built to withstand market shock because its values are non-negotiable, not based on transient profit margins. The long-term impact of unshakable resilience is the creation of a more humane and sustainable future for everyone it touches. In our hyper-connected, volatile modern world, the art of not breaking is more relevant than ever. Our current environment is defined by chronic, low-grade stress and the constant threat of systemic shock, financial volatility, climate change, and information overload. The modern challenge is not a single, catastrophic event, but a constant, low-level emotional drain. This demands a daily, micro-resilience. Kaito Tanaka's focus on the internal locus of control is the answer to the modern tyranny of external validation sought through social media and constant comparison. His lesson is clear: true self-worth must be digitally insulated. Dr. Thorne's principles of compassionate engagement are the antidote to the modern epidemic of burnout and professional isolation, reminding us that emotional connection and vulnerability are essential components of a sustainable career. His legacy is the argument that a high-performing professional must prioritize psychological maintenance. Seraphina Reyes's internal architecture is the blueprint for maintaining mental sanity in the face of an overwhelming, chaotic news cycle. Her practice of selective attention and future forging is a vital skill for filtering the constant noise and maintaining a clear sense of personal purpose amidst global anxieties. The modern relevance is profound. The skills developed in an isolation cell, a failed finance firm, and a pediatric ward are, in fact, the universal tools necessary to navigate the digital age without suffering emotional collapse. Despite the wealth of evidence and the clarity of the primary conclusion, a few lingering mysteries remain in the pursuit of unshakable resilience, suggesting future avenues of research. The primary unanswered question is the genetics of the early pivot. While we have established that resilience is primarily a learned skill, what is the exact genetic or early developmental trigger that makes some people instinctively execute the cognitive reframing sooner after trauma than others? Is there a subtle, inherited physiological advantage that allows a faster reset of the nervous system, or is this entirely a product of pre-trauma emotional attachment and early life care? The mystery remains in the microseconds between the shock and the response. A second lingering question is the upper limit of antifragility. Can a person become too antifragile? If an individual learns to thrive on shock and chaos, does this lead to a subtle, unconscious seeking of adversity? Could the drive for growth post-trauma inadvertently lead to a high-risk lifestyle, a subtle form of trauma addiction where stability becomes boring? This is the paradox of the unshakable self, the psychological need to continuously test the strength they have built. The final mystery is the nature of collective resilience. We have seen that individual strength ripples outward, but how can we deliberately engineer entire communities, cities, or organizations to possess the same anti-fragile characteristics? Can an institution practice self-compassion? Can a nation perform a grief ritual? These unanswered questions show that the art of not breaking is not a finished work, but a continuing, evolving exploration into the ultimate capacity of the human condition. The art of not breaking is not a guidebook on how to avoid pain, but a master class on how to use it. Our journey through the lives of Dr. Elias Thorne, Seraphina Reyes, and Kaito Tanaka has revealed that unshakable resilience is an achievable, measurable skill, built upon 6 foundational principles. Embrace internal locus of control, focus exclusively on your response, not the event. Practice cognitive reframing, actively search for the purpose or lesson within the pain. Establish ritual and routine, create small islands of predictability to anchor the mind in chaos. Cultivate radical self-compassion, forgive your own struggles to lower internal psychological pressure. Prioritize recovery over stamina, use techniques like HRV boosting, e.g., controlled breathing, to quickly regulate the nervous system. Convert pain into external purpose, use your suffering to fuel a mission that is greater than yourself, achieving anti-fragility. The final thought is a quiet and powerful affirmation. The truly resilient person is not the one who stands tall and impervious in the storm. The resilient person is the one who understands they will get wet, they will be cold, and they will feel the wind. But they possess the tools, the inner architecture, to know that the storm is temporary. They are not waiting for the world to stop breaking them. They are actively, consciously, and deliberately choosing not to break. They are forging gold from the cracks. This is the unshakable truth, and it is the only freedom that truly matters.